Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is absolutely crucial and, frankly, a lot of fun. We're talking about connecting microcontrollers to the physical world and doing it safely, effectively, and efficiently.
Come on, be honest. Have you ever fried a microcontroller? You know the feeling. You plug in a wire, maybe you hear a tiny little pop, or worse, you get that dreaded smell of burnt silicone. And just like that, your board is literally toast. The stakes in hardware design are high, right? One wrong wire or one mismatched voltage can permanently destroy your components. Well, today we're going to make sure that never happens to you again.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll be exploring what is hardware interfacing, sensing the real world, powering heavy-duty actuators, crucial circuit design rules, and finally, mastering low-power modes. Okay, let's jump right in. Section 1, what is hardware interfacing? Think about it like this. A microcontroller on its own, it's basically just an isolated brain trapped in a little silicon box. Hardware interfacing is exactly what it sounds like. It's the process of connecting that microcontroller to external devices so it can read inputs, make decisions, and control outputs. It's the bridge, the vital link connecting pure digital logic inside the chip to actual physical actions in the real world. When you wire it all up, you create this bustling, interconnected ecosystem. You've got input devices like sensors or keypads feeding data directly to the MCU. Meanwhile, output devices like displays and motors are actively responding to its commands. And tying the whole thing together are communication modules, using protocols like UART, SPI, and I2C. Those are basically just standard languages that let completely different chips seamlessly talk to each other. Moving on to Section 2, Sensing the Real World. So, if the microcontroller is the brain, then sensors are its eyes, ears, and fingertips. And they generally fall into two distinct camps. On one side, we have analog sensors. These output a continuous voltage that changes based on what they're measuring, like a light sensor or a thermistor tracking heat. But since microcontrollers only understand ones and zeros, these analog sensors require an analog-to-digital converter, or ADC, to translate that voltage into a digital number. On the flip side, we've got digital sensors. These output simple binary high or low signals, or they send neatly formatted serial data. They're way simpler to interface with because, well, you don't need an ADC at all. The microcontroller understands their language right out of the box. But it's rarely as simple as just plugging a sensor in and calling it a day. Raw sensor data usually needs a little TLC, which we call signal conditioning. First, you capture that raw sensor output. Then comes the real magic. You might need to amplify a really weak signal, filter out annoying electrical noise, or scale the voltage so it perfectly matches what the microcontroller is expecting. Only after all that is the clean signal passed into the ADC input. That ensures the data your brain is reading is actually accurate and, most importantly, safe. Let's tackle Section 3, Powering Heavy-Duty Actuators. Shifting from gathering data to taking action means we need to engage the muscles of our system, the actuators. Now, simple outputs like a basic LED or a buzzer, they're pretty easy to connect. However, even for a standard LED, the microcontroller's GPIO pins, its general-purpose input/output pins, must be protected. These pins are fundamentally weak. You absolutely have to use a current-limiting resistor, usually somewhere between 220 and 1,000 ohms, to prevent the LED from drawing too much current and totally frying the pin. And that weakness? It becomes a massive issue when you start dealing with heavy-duty actuators like motors. Think about it. A standard GPIO pin can only supply a tiny trickle of current, roughly 10 to 40 milliamps. But a motor might demand hundreds of milliamps or even several amps just to spin up. If you try to connect them directly, you will instantly fry your microcontroller, no question. The workaround here is using driver circuits. Think of them as muscle amplifiers, like the L298 motor driver IC. The microcontroller just sends a tiny, perfectly safe control signal to the driver, and the driver handles all the high-current heavy lifting. Which brings us to Section 4, Crucial Circuit Design Rules. Okay, listen up, because this is arguably the most critical part of hardware interfacing, protection circuitry. Let's say you try connecting a 5-volt logic board, like a classic Arduino Uno, straight to a 3.3-volt logic board, like an ESP32. That is a recipe for absolute disaster. You're basically force-feeding it too much electrical pressure, and it will permanently damage that 3.3-volt chip. You always have to check your datasheets. To bridge this gap safely, you need translators. Things like level shifter ICs or simple resistor voltage dividers are completely mandatory here to step those 5 volts down to a safe 3.3 volts. And beyond just voltage levels, there are a few non-negotiable rules for a stable, healthy circuit. Obviously, you need the right power supply. You need capacitors for filtering out noise and keeping that power stable. You've got to use pull-up or pull-down resistors so your digital pins don't just float and give you crazy random readings. But above all else, you absolutely must have a common ground. If your different components don't share a common ground, they literally don't share a reference point for what 0 volts even means. And if that happens, nothing is going to communicate correctly. Now we have to talk about a very specific, totally crucial type of protection, the flyback diode. When you're working with inductive loads, basically anything with coils of wire inside, like motors or relays, they act kind of like electrical rubber bands. When you turn them off, their magnetic field collapses and snaps back, generating a huge reverse voltage spike known as back EMF. A flyback diode sits right across the load. It's your ultimate bodyguard. It takes that destructive reverse spike and just safely loops it back around, completely shielding your delicate microcontroller. So let's put the whole shebang together into the ultimate safe driver workflow. Your weak GPIO pin sends a tiny signal over to a transistor or a MOSFET. That transistor acts as a super smart switch, completely separated from the heavy lifting, allowing high current from a separate power supply to flow right through your relay or motor. And wrapping it all up in a nice layer of armor, you've got your flyback diode sitting across the motor, ready to block any dangerous voltage spikes the second the system turns off. This right here, this is how professional, indestructible circuits are designed. All right, final stretch, Section 5, Mastering Low Power Modes. If you're building a battery-operated Internet of Things device, power is your most precious resource, hands down. Microcontrollers handle this by offering graded sleep modes, letting you balance power savings against how quickly you need the system to wake up. And the savings are huge. Active mode might pull, say, 10 to 80 milliamps, but step it down to sleep mode, and that drops to just 1 to 5 milliamps. Deep sleep, where only the real-time clock is ticking, measures in microamps, typically 10 to 50 microamps, and in true hibernate mode, the draw is less than 5 microamps. Guys, that is the difference between a battery dying in 2 days and lasting for 2 whole years. But hey, don't worry, your microcontroller isn't dead while it's sleeping. It's really just rusting. You can strategically wake it up using specific triggers called wake-up sources. For example, you can set a timer alarm to wake up an ESP32 every hour. Or you could use an external GPIO interrupt on an STM32, so it springs to life the exact second a button is pressed or a motion sensor trips. You can even use incoming serial data or an RTC alarm to bring the whole system back online precisely when it's needed, and not a millisecond before. Writing code that actually sips power takes a few actionable strategies. First, reduce your clock speed. If your device doesn't need lightning-fast processing, just slow the CPU down. Power consumption scales right along with frequency. Second, disable unused peripherals. If you're not using the ADC or the SPI modules, turn them off in your software so they don't just sit there draining current. And finally, implement sensor duty cycling. Basically, don't leave your sensors on all the time. Power them up, take your reading from, say, a DHT22 temperature sensor, power it back down, and put the whole board into deep sleep for another 60 seconds. And look, these power-saving techniques aren't just theoretical classroom stuff. They are the absolute backbone of modern electronics. Think about smart meters on the side of your house, or remote agricultural sensors checking soil moisture in the middle of a massive field, or even the smart watch you're wearing right now. By optimizing these circuits and meticulously managing those low-power sleep states, untethered IoT devices can run reliably for months or even years on a single tiny battery. Wow, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's quickly hit the key takeaways, your absolute rules of the road. 1. Always match voltage levels between devices. Use level shifters if you have to, just don't blow up your chips. 2. Never drive heavy loads directly from your MCU. Always use driver circuits to protect those weak GPIO pins. 3. Don't forget your flyback diodes across inductive loads like motors to block those nasty back EMF spikes. And 4. Utilize those graded sleep modes. They will dramatically extend the battery life of your IoT projects. So there you have it. You now know the secrets to bridging the digital and physical worlds safely and efficiently. You know how to give a silicon brain its senses, how to wire up its muscles without causing a total meltdown, and how to program it to survive completely off the grid for years at a time. So I leave you with this question. Now that you have these incredible engineering skills in your toolkit, what untethered smart device are you going to build next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.